Hello, my name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I want to um, I want to emphasize an earlier discussion of President Roosevelt's. That's President Franklin D. Roosevelt's internment of Japanese Americans during the Second World War, and when I did that video, and when we often talk about that video, we often do something, and I probably, I probably reflected that myself in the discussion because, of course, it was a very horrible period in American history. It's been described as a stain, right, in American history and even in our jurisprudence. Um, it almost appeared. I mean, in fact, not let me not say almost. Um, Justice Frank Murphy, who was in the dissent in the case Korematsu versus um, United States, which was decided, I think, finally in 1944. I'm not going to discuss that case here because I've done a video discussing it. He drew a parallel between the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans with what the Nazis were doing to Jews in Germany. So many times, it's America is heavily criticized. Our leaders are very criticized, and Americans as well. Uh, you know, because of that period in American history. But that's not the first time that marginalized communities were victimized. I mean, America started with we have a history of slavery, right? Slavery, was part of you know was constitutional, was protected by the Constitution from the beginning of our nation. Um, Slavery of black people, slavery based on race, while it didn't start, interestingly, it didn't start until maybe solidly on, it didn't become effected in law and start to crystallize until about 1662, when Virginia passed laws uh, which which established slavery based on partus sequitur ventrum. That's a Latin phrase from slavery following the womb, right? So um, the status of the mother was inherited by her child. So if the mother is a slave, her child is a slave as well. So that's partus um, sequitur ventrum. Because at the beginning, I've done videos, and there was a reason I was trying to emphasize at the beginning, America, we had penal colonies. Some colonies were penal, semi-penal. For instance, Louisiana was established as a penal colony where convicts and criminals were sent, rejects, and there are people who were actually indentured servants, and many of them were white people. In Georgia, for instance, Georgia was started as a semi-penal colony. A quarter of Maryland had uh, whites who were indentured servants. So there wasn't that distinction between white servants and black servants, until the codes like in Virginia, Partus Sequitur Ventrum were established in 1662, and then the uh, anti-miscegenation laws, which stopped blacks and whites from marrying, and then so they could now make slavery based on race. So we've had a lot of evils, right, in our history, apart from the internment of the Japanese in the Second World War. But something that I want to do is, while I talk about history and we talk about history, right, you have to be very self-critical. History helps us to enhance our critical thinking skills, right? It helps us um, to reflect, right, to be introspective, and to be while we're being retrospective at the same time. But for the mundane, for the banal, by the way, I guess that's what I'm going to title this video. Banality of Evil lens, and I'm going to discuss that. For the banal, let me just put it out there and clarify that um, I love America. I'm an American citizen now. And the fact that I wasn't an American citizen at one time, I wasn't born here, right? I came, I didn't come with my parents, I didn't come with family, but I was able to succeed, right? I was able to enter from the bottom and go into the most uh, prestigious of spheres within America. From I'm a graduate of an Ivy League, right? Those 8 schools, everybody knows the Ivy Leagues, right? I'm a graduate of an Ivy League, Columbia University. I'm a graduate of the most respected or the most powerful profession in America, law. Right? Maybe they're not the most admired, but European diplomats once called America an aristocracy of lawyers. When you see Congress, majority of the Congress people, majority of the politicians, the senators who make America's laws are lawyers. Majority of the presidents, the most recurrent profession in the American presidential annals is lawyer, right? Even more than generals and soldiers, like lawyers. So I've been able to do all of these things without a family, and apart from my success in the private sector, right? I worked in Fortune 500 companies from Bank of America in elite spaces, right? What mattered to me in public service, right? I had the opportunity of being able to get into the Department of Defense, right? That's the largest, it's the richest political department in the world. The budget of the Department of Defense is about $1 trillion, right? Almost $1 trillion. It's Everybody knows that we have the most lethal military force in the world, and I was selected into a program as a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow, and I was the number one pick. The John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow is actually a program for, uh, it's a career path program selecting future senior leaders of the Department of Defense. So you're picked right away, and then you're mentored by a senior executive of the Department of Defense, so you too can be one like them. Senior executive service, those are the highest levels of the federal civil service in America. The equivalent, the way they created them, they marked the equivalent of generals, right? So if you see them in the Department of Defense, a senior executive service, a member actually has a military aide de camp walking around with them, a military escort, just like the generals do. So they're civilians, but uh, they 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 matched them, right, made them equivalent to generals, right, in rank and status. And so and that's, I was selected to be on that career path, right? And I was reporting directly to them as a John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow. So the opportunities I've had, obviously, I love America because I didn't have to have an uncle or dad or father in America to get me these positions, right? Write me a letter like they do somewhere else. Originally from Nigeria. I have no doubt that the successes I would have had in Nigeria had I been in Nigeria. I've spent majority of my life in America now. Uh, had I been in Nigeria, I believe my successes would have been due to uh, the status of my family or my friends. Right, in America, I was fortunate to be able to make progress based on merit with our family, without having fair friends write me a letter and things like that. So, obviously, for someone like me, I love America. So I'm an American citizen now, but and I'm black, right? My closest relatives, I mean, if you're talking about an ethnic group that's uh, most related to me, of course, we Americans, we're all one, but we're a diverse nation, to be honest, in terms of right? We're a diverse nation, diverse group of people. It will be African Americans that are, my closest relatives, people closest to me. And African Americans here are the descendants of those people who were enslaved due to the law of patus sequitur ventrum, like I said, right? So they are still the most discriminated group in America. And so I'm an American citizen. Does that make me separate from their from what their experiences will be. No, I mean it's kind of ironic that it was like after I became an American citizen that I experienced my swatting. I've done videos and talked about my swatting experience, but despite that, I still have to point out the magnificence of America. It's the most immigrant friendly nation in the world, and I have to point that out, especially in these times of ICE raids. There's a huge anti-immigrant sentiment in America today, and I had to think about the status of us, new Africans, us Nigerians. That okay, you know what? Um, I have the benefit of history to be able to analyze and compare and contrast because a lot of Africans, I'm not, there are many Nigerians that have done far much better than me here in America, especially considering my own objective was not to immigrate. I was just fortunate that, I'm an American citizen, right? And I was very fortunate, right? Because I did come here, I still have my family back in Nigeria. Um, so there have been so many other Nigerians, Africans, new Africans who've succeeded tremendously. But having the benefit of history, I'm able to compare and see, okay, what is the future of Nigerians and these new Africans that America is welcoming, right, to be part of the nation, right? Because this is an immigrants can contribute tremendously to the success of America. From the first immigrant in the first American cabinet, Alexander Hamilton. He was an immigrant. Yes, he was white. I'm not going to get into the race issue, right? Because, right now, but Alexander Hamilton was an immigrant. And when we defined citizenship in our Constitution with the 14th Amendment, uh, it made the immigrant citizen, right, not born here, that's a naturalized in the 14th Amendment, Section 1, and the natural born American, it made them equal. It didn't create a two-tier system. It said, well, they're equal, right? Their rights will not be abridged, right? They both have equal protection, due process of equal protection of the law, due process of the laws. They're equal, right? So but at the same time today we're seeing this anti-immigrant hysteria with the ICE raids. But so it made me want to uh, you know, look again back into history. And now we're going to go into Europe because you find something in history, history goes in cycles, as the great historian, Arabian historians, Ibn Khaldun said, the history of empires is in rises and falls and it goes in cycles. And so we'll see that what we're experiencing now, you can see it's happened before in history. And many times they keep likening, they keep make drawing parallels between this administration, this government with Nazi administration in the Nazi era in Germany. And it seems like people are just oversimplifying Nazism. Well, something that an author that I read, her name's she was a journalist, she was a writer, Hannah Arendt. She wrote Banality of Evil, and it's a great book, and that's what I sort of want to touch on today. Um, Something she points out is that great evils are not done by people that are necessarily monstrous or have malice, that great evils are done by ordinary people, right? Ordinary people in society that just, are being compliant and are indifferent. They're not thinking critically. They don't have exercise independent judgment. They do great evils for the most mundane reasons, right? And that's what I'm going to be, trying uh, to analyze today, right? I'm going to be discussing Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil, and just talking about the history of Jewish people in Europe and drawing parallels, because that's what Americans are doing today. They keep referring to the current administration and ICE as Gestapo, the Nazis, and things like that. Um, these Nazis were not necessarily monstrous people, right? They did monstrous things, but they were ordinary people, right? They were ordinary people, and this is what the book by Hannah Arendt. It was actually just a so I read it when I was a Holocaust study fellow. I was lucky. I was a Holocaust study fellow at the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia, and so I read. It was one of those readings we had to do, and I found it very interesting. So if you can grab a copy of it, you can read it and understand um, how it applies to even today, and it gives you a lens from the era of the Holocaust and the actions of Nazi officials against Jewish people in concentration camps and what's happening today in America, right? Um, so let me get into just talk a little, explain a little bit about um, the banality of evil. So it was about a guy called Adolf Eichmann. So she was at the trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1961. Adolf Eichmann had been a Nazi official who had been, he was a member of the SS, and he had been responsible for transporting, over about 500,000 Jewish people to concentration camps where they were exterminated. And, you know, so, and so the Mossad, of course, he was hiding, he had escaped uh, justice, but after the Mossad was able to capture him and take him to Israel, where he was tried, sort of like a kangaroo court, because the outcome was obvious, and he was executed. So Hannah Arendt, sorry, she was Jewish herself, so she was analyzing the man, the history of the man, Adolf Eichmann, and she was noting how he wasn't exactly like this a psychopath, that he was a very ordinary, banal man, and this is sort of what you get out of the banality of evil. Americans, we are very emotional. We are overly sensitive, and that's why even Alexander Hamilton, he was very suspicious of the masses because they're easily, a demagogue easily manipulates the masses who don't develop their critical thinking, right? Um, so Hannah Arendt, there's something that she observes in Adolf Eichmann. She observed the ordinariness of the man. That he wasn't, he was very nondescript. He had just a very normal appearance, even his background. And he wasn't successful. And this was very common amongst a lot of Nazi officials, right, who did these horrible things, right? It's interesting that Adolf Eichmann went to the same sort of secondary school equivalent of that Adolf Hitler had gone to about 17 years ago. Just like Adolf Hitler, he didn't graduate. He wasn't a great student. He didn't perform well. Adolf Hitler as well. He wasn't successful. He was just very ordinary. And these are the very, very, it was something that Anna Arendt was noticing about a lot of these Nazis, right? That they weren't exceptional people. They weren't these evil geniuses. They weren't exceptionally, bright people. They were ordinary people, right? And they were they were very officious. They were bureaucrats, just low level, ordinary bureaucrats, and they had this bureaucratic normalcy about their ways that allowed them to just normalize evil directives without exercising independent judgment, without thinking critically about what they were doing, and you know, and it's part of what the founding fathers were looking out for. That look, if you have these ordinary people whose intellect isn't well developed, they're easily manipulated by a demagogue. And the founding fathers didn't want the masses to, the majority of people to have an education. And even John Quincy Adams later on, he wanted all Americans to have access to education, right? Because you need to be able to develop your critical thinking skills, right? To be able to choose the appropriate leader. And so Alexander Hamilton, that's right, why they wanted the electoral college. That, okay, people who were analytical were able to choose the right leaders, people who had developed their minds. And this is something Hannah Arendt is sort of noticing in observing in a banality of evil. That, they just had, the Nazis were a lot of these low level, ordinary bureaucrats who were just career oriented, and they just complied. They just did these evil things. They're just doing their jobs without thinking critically. They were just being officious. They were just being dutiful. They didn't let the implications, the significance of what they were doing, they didn't let it sip in. They didn't let it affect them, on the human level, right? And I want to be very careful when we talk about Nazis, and let it not appear as if Germans are just particularly evil people. I'm a Christian, right? I'm a Christian, and of course, I love reading the Bible. Right, I've read it from cover to cover. I continue to do so. And of course, I attend a church where that's part of what we do. We read it regularly, all the time, because you find out you keep learning something new, right? You keep learning something new from the Bible. Bible is not one of those books that you just read and you put it down. You say you know it. No, every time you read it through again, it's as if you had never read it before through, right? So it's somewhere in the Bible where it says the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, right? And that's the book of Jeremiah, 17 verse 9, I think, right? It's not saying the heart of German people or the heart of Jewish people or the heart of Egyptians or the heart of black people or Africans. No, the heart of man, right? We're all members of mankind. We're all the same. The heart of man is desperately wicked, and so the banality of evil helps us realize that Hannah Arendt's book. It's very it's less than 40 pages. It's a very short piece. It was actually published in as an article, right? I think it was in New Yorker. That was where I got my copy from, the New Yorker. It was just a very, very long article. Um, it's just it's pointing out how ordinary people can people without malice, right? They don't necessarily have evil intentions in their hearts. They can do capable of doing very great evils, right? Very great evil things if they're unreflecting, if they don't have critical thinking, as uh, you know, if they don't think critically, if they don't exercise independent judgment in our desire uh, to be accepted, to join a group, right? And I talked about how I joined the Department of Defense as a McCain Fellow, John S. McCain Strategic Defense Fellow, and I also joined another group, as an auditor in the Department of the Navy, and I saw this bureaucratic thing that Hannah Arendt was writing about, this corporate compliance, and people do evil things just following the orders of somebody at the top without reflecting. I saw it amongst people I worked with. They just complied. They conspired to harm me, the great evil that I've suffered, right? It was all the swatting. They're the ones who instigated it. It was somebody at the top who manipulated my colleagues, who just did evil things without reflecting, right? It was somebody at the top who orchestrated it. And you see it, you can easily draw a parallel with what Hannah Arendt is talking about that these Nazis did, right? In the banality of evil, right? So it's not that Germans or a group of people are necessarily evil or even have malicious intentions towards any another group or animosity. Um, the right conditions when we're unreflective will create uh, would allow people to normalize evil actions, right? In Germany, the growth of Nazism. So we see how Adolf Eichmann was drawn into the Nazi Party and the the propaganda that came about following the defeat of Germany in the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles that humiliated and impoverished them. And, there was now the propaganda against the Jews, right? There was propaganda against Jewish people. And there was now this talk about Lebensraum. I think it's German. It means expansion of living space, right? So they were now saying, well, that Jewish people were taking their living space, their opportunities, and they were now trying to deprive the Jews of their citizenship. They wanted to strip Jewish people of their citizenship and their civil rights. This was what they decided to do. And we're seeing that in America today. I was doxxed. I was the same nation that made me an American citizen, gave me the best opportunities, made them available to me, right? And I was working in a top secret position. I was holding a TSSCI. It's still there, right? Top secret TSSCI, the highest level of national security clearance. All of a sudden, I was being targeted, right? I was being targeted by these bureaucrats, right? These bureaucrats that are uncritical, and they were being manipulated by some people. So I was doxxed. So they're posting false failure to pay notices on my door. So I'm just showing you parallels of how it happens. And then I was swatted, right? The false crisis call was made, and the police assaulted me, attacked me, came to raid me in my home. I wasn't committing any crime. They violated my 14th Amendment, Fourth Amendment rights, and they framed me. They fabricated events, falsifying things, and then they stole my certificate of naturalization. These people were so dumb. They thought by stealing my certificate of naturalization, my US passport ID, my social security card, that strips me of citizenship. No, I'm still an American citizen, right? I still have my passport, but even if they stole my passport, right? When you become a naturalized American citizen, your fingerprints, everything, nobody can steal your identity, right? So this was, so we're seeing these things. If it happened to me, I wonder what's happening. Okay, we're hearing that ICE, they've been deporting American citizens. It's been happening. And you hear people wanting to strip certain people of their citizenship rights. So you're seeing parallels with Nazi era Germany. And again, I wanted to point out that America is the most immigrant friendly nation in the world. It is. Again, that's why I pointed. I wasn't using it to brag because I was trying to explain. And the thing is, I wasn't desirous of these great opportunities I've had. It just came to me. I work hard. I focus on what I'm supposed to do. When the McCain Fellowship, somebody just picked me out. They just picked me out that, hey, apply for this. We saw your resume. We think you'd be a great fit for this. That's how I got it. And when I was picked, I was the number one pick. If you look at the John S. McCain Strategic Fellowship today, if you check it out, there's not a single black person there. They're all white people in this cohort, this last cohort, right? When I was picked, I was the only black male there in my cohort, and I was the number one pick, right? And there was a guy who was mixed race, right? He was half black, half white, but he probably didn't identify as black. I don't know, but anyway, um, you know, so I was selected in this elite program because America is a very immigrant friendly nation, right? And that's how Germany was for Jews, right? So the fact that Jews were carted off, placed in extermination camps, and 6 million of them were exterminated. Many people don't point out that the Germans were the ones who showed the most love to Jewish people in Europe, right? Let me quickly just mention that now. The Jews, of course, have a long history in Europe. Their original home was in the Middle East, right in the Middle East. And it was during the Roman Empire that they were kicked out of their lands during the dispersion of AD 70, AD 70, right? During the Roman empires, right? And their conquests. And so they dispersed into Europe. Now, there was a lot of discrimination against Jewish people, right? When they were in Europe, there were laws that, for instance, in France, there were laws that prevented people from giving them shelter because they were Middle Easterners, right? There are laws that discriminated against them, preventing the people from giving them shelter or even talking to them under the penalty of death, right? In Europe, in even as over time as they try to assimilate and settle within Europe, for instance, in Spain, King Ferdinand and Isabel, they implemented the Edict of Expulsion that tried to force Jewish people that if they didn't convert to Catholicism, they had to be kicked out, right, of Spain. So over 150,000 Jewish people were kicked out. In the Russian Empire, there were constant pogroms on them. So before the Holocaust that we all know of the 20th century, there were always little acts of genocide here and there in the Russian Empire. Pogroms, that's like, they target them communities and they exterminate them, right? So those things went on and on and on. Their women would be raped, and things like that. So they suffered these things for a long time in Europe. They were banned from actually going from participating, going attending their universities, their schools, from participating in their trades and mixing in society amongst the Europeans. They were just banned. The only thing that they were allowed to do, if they had legal status, was to engage in the lending trade. So people talk about Jewish people being very good in business or being bankers or whatever. Well, because that's what Europe allowed them to do. That was the only thing the European lords and kings, their governments allowed them to do in the Middle Ages, right? So in the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, because they were banned from everything else, banned from the universities. It was not until Napoleon Bonaparte, right, that when he established the careers for the gifted, and that he allowed them to start getting into certain professions and the schools. So even so there was this long history of discrimination against Jewish people in Europe, but Germany was the most welcoming place for the Jewish people. So you see, even their names, they would have established all these laws. That's why people notice that Jewish people have certain names, right? Um, they engage in something called double naming, but uh, the King of Prussia, for instance, Joseph II, in 1787, he required them to now take specific names from a list, an approved list, that Jewish people to identify them, and it was for the purpose of being able to tax, Jewish people, and also being able to target them for separation when it was convenient. Napoleon himself did it. He required them to take on certain names and banned them from using uh, patronymics and things like that. So, uh, so there was this long tradition of persecution that Jewish people suffered, but Germany was the most welcoming place for them, and so they succeeded in Germany and things like that. But eventually, you get a group of people saying, "Well, these people we welcomed and are now doing well. They're taking our living space, they're taking our jobs, our professions, and it's concerning, right? Because this is what we're hearing now in America, the same stuff that the Nazis were doing, and it's normally the ordinary people, the banal. So when we're talking about that, they need to increase and education for everybody, right? Um, the class wars don't help, right? They're these demagogues, they're these people. I'm a progressive person, right? But sometimes I hear people just saying the rich versus the poor, and the billionaire versus the whatever, right? It's like it's just very inflammatory rhetoric sometimes, and it's not helpful, because it's like lighting a powder keg under the you know amongst the ordinary people that are not great critical thinkers, right? So it's so critical, it's so important for America to focus on education for everybody, because um, And this is what Hannah Arendt is saying in Banality of Evil, because it just shows how ordinary people just doing their jobs, right? They're not great thinkers. They're not reflective. They're just doing their jobs and they're just complying. Can do very great atrocities, and it's like we're there right now. The atrocious things. Like I've talked about how I was swatted, the barbaric ways, the barbaric things that Montgomery County Police did to me. The fact that, apart from the fact that I was in my home, even if I was removed naked, in handcuffs, naked. I was shot, tased multiple times. I was in my home, not committing any crime. Of course, they had spread falsehoods, right? And you have people like the public defender, my attorneys. They know I've done nothing wrong. I'm innocent, and every time they're checking my case, they're looking at me naked, in handcuffs, shot, bloodied. Somebody who wasn't committing any crime. I was in my home when the police came. They swatted me. That's the evidence we see. My attorney saying it now. I was swatted. They made a false crisis call. And I was handcuffed and I was dehumanized, even though they knew that they went to go and lock me up for 15 months. The evil judge, James Bonifant, had me locked up for 15 months, pretending like there was something wrong with me, even though he just wanted to coerce me. He was actually breaking the law. He wanted to coerce me to accept a wrongful plea bargain. And they did it because of top people at the Department of Defense. I wouldn't be surprised if it went all the way to the Secretary of the Navy, Carlos del Toro, if it went all the way to Lloyd Austin himself, Secretary of Defense, the atrocity that happened to me, right? And you see the banality of evil. And low-level people are the ones who execute it. They don't question, right? The evil orders that they've been given by somebody at the top, right? So you have, maybe the deputy of the Secretary of Defense who was one who gave those orders. The white woman who was under Lloyd Austin. If Lloyd Austin didn't do it himself, because he was a black man, I don't know that he would have ordered them to do something so heinous against me. Or Carlos del Toro, the Secretary of the Navy, right? So it was something I just wanted to clarify in looking, because I did an earlier video regarding Korematsu and FDR. So FDR was a great president and he had a heart for Americans, but he's also guilty of this atrocity that America committed against Japanese Americans. Of course, Japanese Americans were subsequently given their survivors. Survivors were paid reparations, about $20,000 per person, but was that sufficient to cover what they suffered? They lost their businesses, lost a lot of things, mass incarceration. We haven't talked about what African Americans have experienced, have suffered, right? So, Banality of Evil, try and read it. Hannah Arendt. It's talking about how ordinary people, without necessarily having malicious intentions, without necessarily having evil intentions, just without being, just because they're not critical thinkers, they don't reflect, they just comply, they're just bureaucrats, they normalize evil, right? By not questioning, by not being independent, having independent judgment, by wanting to just be accepted, be among, right? They just want to be accepted by a group. They don't question, and they victimize, they bully, they abuse other people. And this is very common, it's very pervasive in America today. I'm going to stop this here. And yeah, so Banality of Evil by Hannah Arendt. And it provides insight on group thinking and how ordinary people, the most mundane of people, they're not necessarily sociopaths or evil geniuses like we make monsters, the people who commit the most monstrous crimes to be. It might just be your regular, friendly neighbor, good dad, doing the most evil crimes. Uh, in the world, and they do it, just complying. And we need to be able to check this out in our society, because it's like we're there. We've done it before. We did it during President Herbert Hoover with the Mexican repatriation, repatriations, right? It's when um, Herbert Hoover, his administration actually forced state governments, local governments, to just arrest Mexican Americans who were citizens, charge them with false crimes, make life, you know, the environment very hostile and their lives unlivable so they couldn't get jobs, just so they would self-deport to Mexico, where many of them had never been to. Over 300,000 of them were deported that way, so that they would leave job vacancies for white men to be able to fill. And that's where we are right now, right? The Judge James Bonifant, I had a job with the Department of Navy. I had a job at the Pentagon, new great job that I had worked for. Judge Bonifant said he wanted me to lose my job. So for 3 years, I haven't worked. They used false charges. So this is the sort of thing they did during the Mexican repatriation. Uh, they filed false charges for 3 years. I haven't had a trial. Fabrications, right? So this is an illegal thing that's been done using Montgomery County courts in Maryland. Uh, and they offered me a plea bargain, an alternative, these terrible plea bargains, right? Wrongful plea bargains. For instance, they asked me that, well, if I go back to Nigeria, even though I'm an American citizen, I don't have any immigration problem. If I go back to Nigeria and they'll come back, they'll drop the charges. And if I ever come back to America, they'll raise the charges again, right? So they just wanted to make America hostile to me. I don't have any immigration problem. My problem is not with immigration. It's the county. County in America that I don't really want to live in. It doesn't. How does it affect the other 50 states in America with their respective counties? I'm entitled to my day in court Sixth Amendment rights. They've been violated. I've not. They've prevented me from facing my accuser in a court and examining them and cross-examining my accuser. They've prevented me from having a public trial, a trial by jury, right? They're the ones who have to convict me beyond a reasonable doubt. I can easily prove I'm innocent, but that's not the standard. That's not my burden. They're the ones who have to prove I'm guilty of the false charges they've charged me with beyond a reasonable doubt. They violated, uh, you know, American law with as I said, it's 18 USC, section 241 and 242. That's a deprivation of rights and call of law violations. And 42 USC, section 1983, malicious prosecution. So we've been there before, and these are my concerns when I'm telling, I tell some Nigerians who want to come here, and I say, look, don't try to come here. Be where you are, and succeed there. And some of them will be like, oh, because you're there, you don't want other people to come and succeed in America. No, 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 no. You don't know what's going on in America. You cannot not necessarily face what's going on in America. I wonder if I had faced the swatting and discrimination before I became a citizen. I wonder if I would have wanted to be a citizen. I don't know. So food for thought. My name is Olu Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and I've been drawing attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subordination of perjury and fraud on the courts. I was swatted on May 16, 2023, and the police who orchestrated the malicious swatting, the hate crime in my home, where I was not committing any crime. I'm a law-abiding American citizen still. I was swatted in order to obstruct justice. The rogue cops who swatted me filed false charges against me, and I'm still seeking justice. I'll keep you posted. Thank you.